Check out FlipsideGaming.com for all your gaming needs. Use the promo code HEROES to save 10% on all orders over $10. From July 4th through August 26th, if you use this promo code, you will automatically be entered into a drawing to win a set of all 4 Commander 2019 decks. Also, there is another way to enter where no purchase is necessary. See the description below for full details. Hey there, this is John from Heroes and Legends, and it's that time of the week again where we go over the results from the big tournaments from the weekend. This time around, we have Mythic Championship 4, that was a modern event, also sprinkled in a little bit of Modern Horizons draft. Star City Games Columbus had a Modern Open, a Modern Classic, and a Standard Classic. We're going to look at the top 8s from those tournaments, some of the deck lists, with a special focus on cards from Modern Horizons or Core Set 2020 that played a role in these decks. Quickly before we start though, if you haven't pre-ordered Commander 2019 and you're still thinking about doing so, check out FlipsideGaming.com. If you use the Heroes promo code, you can get all 4 of the decks there for $126 and free shipping. Of course, when you use the promo code, it also helps the channel, which is always appreciated, so thank you. And let's get into it. We'll begin, as we always do, with Standard. Here's the top 8 from the Star City Games Standard Classic. First place as well as 7th place, a deck that did well last weekend too, Bant Scapeshift. Second place, Jeskai Hero. Kind of looks like a Jeskai Flyers deck. We'll dig into that in a little bit. Third place, 4-color Elementals. Fourth place, Mono Red Aggro. Fifth place, Jund Dinosaurs. Sixth place, Orzhov Vampires. Eighth place is Esper Hero or Tempo. So we're going to look at 7 out of these 8 deck lists, and we just won't look at the 7th place Bant Scapeshift because it's very similar to the first place one. Let's jump in and look at that first place Bant Scapeshift deck. Okay, very similar to what we saw last weekend. 4 Boreal Grazer, 4 Elvish Rejuvenator, 4 Hydroid Crisis, 4 Teferi Time Raveler. Some of those numbers can move a little bit in these deck lists, but this one is running 4 of all of those. You're going to find a lot of lands here. 4 copies of Field of the Dead that kind of ties the deck together. We'll look at that card in just a second. For Scapeshift, of course, this one is also running 2 Time Wipes to protect itself. Let's go ahead and look at the Core Set 2020 cards that have been part of this deck. Bunch of lands here. Blossoming Sands, Field of the Dead, like I mentioned, Temple of Malady, Temple of Mystery, Thornwood Falls, and Tranquil Cove. You'll find Veil of Summer in the sideboard. Now, some other copies of this deck are running 4 Growth Cycles. I thought that was interesting. And sometimes you'll find Ether Gust and Shifting Ceratops in the sideboard as well. Second place, Jeskai Hero. Like I said in the open, feels a little bit like Flyers Light. There are some flying synergies here. There's other things going on too. Obviously, you do have your Teferis. 1 Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, so I guess, yes, it is a hero deck. 3 Teferi Time Raveler, and a whole bunch of other things going on. We're going to look at the Flying Lord in just a second, but you also have some other flyers to go along with it. 2 big ones here, Empyrean Eagle and Lightning Stormkin. 4 of each of them. In the sideboard, you find Chandra Awakened Inferno and Ether Gust. Third place, 4-color Elementals. Now, there was a Teamer Elemental deck that did really, really well the first week. Second week, it fell off a little bit. Still put up some good results, though, here or there. This week, we get a 4-color variant. Now, it's not too different, but you are going to see some differences. We are going to look at a Teamer one a little bit later. This one is running just a little bit of black. It wants to play Yurok the Desecrated, and that is a good reason to do so. Other than that, you're basically looking at a Teamer deck, but there are some differences, like I said. This one is a little less reliant on ramp compared to a lot of the Teamer Elemental builds. It does have ramp, obviously. You see Leafkin Druid in there, for example, but that's not all that's going on here. It is really playing heavy into the Elemental synergies. You're going to see 3 Neoforms here, too. That's kind of interesting. So let's see what Core Set 2020 brings. It's a lot of cards. We'll get started with these 10 in the main. Chandra Awakened Inferno, Cavalier of Gals, Cloudkin Seer, Scampering Scorcher, Thunderkin Awakener, Cavalier of Thorns, Leafkin Druid, like I mentioned, Omnith Locus of the Royal, Risen Reef, Yurok the Desecrated. But wait, there is more. Couple lands, Temple of Epiphany and Temple of Mystery. Sideboard has 4 more. Ether Gust, Flame Sweep, Fry, and Veil of Summer. Now on to something very different. Mono Red Aggro came in 4th place, and it's not running a whole lot of cards from Core Set 2020. This is a very standard deck list here. 1 Chandra Fire Artisan here in the main, another one in the sideboard. 4 copies of Experimental Frenzy, all in the main in this build. Now, there are no Core Set 2020 cards in the main. Sideboard does have Fry, though. 5th place, Jund Dinosaurs. So one thing you're going to notice if you have a really keen eye, there's actually 61 cards listed here on this deck list, and I do think that is an error from Star City Games. If you look at the creatures here, 2 Drover of the Mighty, I think that's actually supposed to be 1 because this is basically the exact same deck list we looked at last week. And that deck list had 1 instead of 2. So that could just be an error. Other than that, though, yeah, it's the exact same deck list we saw last week. Whole lot of great dinosaurs here. 1 Domri Anarch of Bolas. You get 4 Commune with Dinosaurs, 2 Savage Stop. Let's take a look, though, at Core Set 2020 cards that really push this deck. Rotting Regisaur, Marauding Raptor, and Shifting Ceratops. In the sideboard, you find Noxious Grasp, Flame Sweep, and Veil of Summer. 6th place, Orzhov Vampires, and this is very similar to the Dinosaur deck in the effect that there's a lot of cards that already existed in Standard in this deck, but a few key cards from Core Set 2020 really pushed it. So we saw this deck last week too, very, very similar. 4 Legion's Landings, a whole lot of Vampires. Let's look at the cards from Core Set 2020. Sorin Imperious Bloodlord, key card here, and Knight of the Ebon Legion. Out of the sideboard, you find Legion's End, Disfigure, and Noxious Grasp. 8th place, Esper Hero or Tempo, and yeah, this hasn't changed a whole lot from last season. Still good though, as you can see by the result. 3 Narset Harder Veils, 4 Teferi Hero of Dominaria, 4 Teferi Time Raveler, 2 Hostage Taker, 4 Hero Precinct 1. What does Core Set 2020 contribute here? In the main, a couple copies of Temple of Silence. Sideboard, Legion's End, and Noxious Grasp. We'll go beyond the top 8, look at Teamer Elementals in 9th place, and this deck is very similar to the 4-color one, so I don't want to spend a ton of time on it, but you can see the differences. This one is a little more all-in on ramp. You do have 3 Hydroid Krasis, 4 Leafkin Druid, which we'll look at in a second again, 4 Llanowar Elves, though, in this one, so more ramp. Even can ramp into a Mass Manipulation, which is in the main there. You're also going to find a number of Planeswalkers here, too, with 3 Nissa Who Shakes the World, 2 Tamiyo Collector of Tales, and 1 big one from Core Set 2020. Let's go ahead and look at those cards that are in the main from that set. Not quite as many as we saw in the previous Elementals deck, but we have Chandra Awakened Inferno, Cavalier of Thorns, Leafkin Druid, Omnith Locust of the Royal, Risen Reef, Temple of Epiphany, and Temple of Mystery. The sideboard has quite a few more, though. Another copy of Chandra Awakened Inferno, Cerulean Drake, Aethergust, Fry, and Veil of Summer. 14th place is at Phoenix, another deck from previous seasons that can still perform well. 4 Arclight Phoenix, of course, 4 Crackling Drake, 4 Goblin Electromancers in this particular build, 1 Saheeli Sublime Artificer as well in the main, also 1 in the sideboard. A lot of cheap spells, which you would expect. Let's see what Core Set 2020 brings. Just 1 copy of Temple of Epiphany in the main. Sideboard has Aethergust, Flame Sweep, and Fry. 16th place, Bant Midrange. Now, this is kind of a variation on the Teamer Elementals deck we looked at a little bit ago. Still very ramp focused, still has things like Risen Reef in here, as well as Hydroid Crisis, Leafkin Druid, Llanowar Elves. Similar cards, definitely, but there are some key differences. We're going to look at one of those in just a second. When it comes to Planeswalkers, 4 Nissa Who Shakes the World, 4 Teferi Time Raveler. Also in the sideboard, you do have a copy of Tamiyo Collector of Tales. You even have 1 copy of Finale of Glory in the main. 2 Mass Manipulations can come out of the sideboard. Let's go ahead and look at those Core Set 2020 cards. Some of these are already mentioned, but Cavalier of Thorns, Leafkin Druid. Now, here's the card I thought was interesting. Voracious Hydra. I played against it on Magic Arena. It is good here. Risen Reef and Temple of Mystery. Sideboard has Aethergust and Veil of Summer. Alright, time for Mythic Championship 4. Doesn't get much bigger than that. This was a modern event this time around. Now, there were a few rounds of Modern Horizons drafts, so when we talk about the decks in the top 8 in just a second, remember that some decks could have got propped up a little bit if the player did well in those draft rounds. Or other decks might not have done as well if the player didn't do well there. We are going to look at the top 8, but we're also going to look at some deck lists that performed very well and could have made the top 8, again, if the player just did a little better in drafts, so keep that in mind. Let's begin, though, with what people actually brought to the tournament. This is the day 1 number of players and the percentage of the field on these decks. Okay, so one thing you're going to notice right at the top, Hogak was very dominant when it comes to what people were bringing to the tournament. 98 copies of the deck out there, 21.4%. So going into this smaller meta, pros decided, a lot of them anyway, that this would be the best deck, even with Bridgevine being banned. Some people have said the deck is even better than that Bridgevine variant from a few weeks ago, which is pretty crazy because that was a good deck. So, you gotta ask yourself, is this going to be something that will continue going forward? Remember, Mythic Championships don't always reflect the larger metagame because people are really trying to meta for this one very specific tournament here. Now, with that being said, that's a lot of players playing this deck, and I would be very surprised if that doesn't translate to a lot of players playing these decks in other tournaments, And whenever you have a lot of decks entering a tournament, there's a good chance it's going to do well in some capacity. And you'll see one of these did make the top 8. Let's look at some of the other decks here. Izzet Phoenix, 48 copies, 10.5%. Eldrazi Tron, 42 copies, 9.2%. Humans and Azorius Control both have 38 copies, 8.3%. Jund, a very popular build right now, 36 copies. That was 7.9%. Tron, when they refer to Tron, typically they're talking mono green Tron here, 19 copies. Urzethopter Sword, I think they kind of mushed all those together because sometimes you get the Grixis one, sometimes the 4-color one. For the most part, they're very similar, so for our purposes today, we'll do the same, but also 19 of those. Burn 18, Dredge 17, now that's your classic Dredge with no Hogak. Mono Red Phoenix 10, Hogak Dredge 7, now that's your classic Dredge, but running some Hogak, typically between 1 and 3 copies. And then there's a few more decks as we go down, I won't read them all off. But as you can see, there's a pretty big variety of decks that different people brought once you get down to the lower numbers. Okay, what happened when it comes to conversion rates? Well, here's day 2. Who made it? Who didn't make it? Hogak still did real good. 98 on day 1, 70 on day 2. So a lot of those players made it through to the second day. 71.4 conversion rate. That is extremely high considering the number of players on the deck. That's a little scary. Now let's look at some other numbers quickly. Izzet Phoenix, 64.6 conversion rate. That's kind of what I would expect from a good deck. Eldrazi Tron, same thing, like 66.7%. Now, as you go lower and the numbers get lower, sometimes they get a little bit skewed because you don't have as many players playing the deck. For example, all 3 Hollow One players made it through, so that's 100%, but that's a little misleading, of course. Or the 3 Snowshift players didn't make it to day 2. I don't think the deck's really that bad, 0%. Okay, let's move on to the top 8. All right, here it is. Tron, the mono green variant of it, came in first place. Second place, Hardened Scales. Now, this deck was not running any cards from Modern Horizons or Core Set 2020, so we won't look at that deck list today, but it is the deck list that has been successful recently, hasn't changed too much. Eldrazi Tron came in 3rd place. 4th place as well as 6th place, we had Jund. 5th place, there's a Thopter Sword, which this is the 4-color version of that deck. Like I said, it's pretty similar to the Grixis one, though. 7th place was Mono Red Phoenix. 8th place, finally, is Hogak, so there's your one Hogak deck. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at that first place Tron deck. Yup, it's Tron. So there is at least a little bit of an influence from Core Set 2020, believe it or not, but for the most part, Tron's Tron, right? You're going to see no real differences in the main here. Veil of Summer, though, in the sideboard. 3rd place is Eldrazi Tron, a mixture of Tron and colorless Eldrazi, basically. Another deck that's been very popular recently. 4 copies of Karn the Great Creator in this main. What do we get from Core Set 2020 again? 1 copy of Mystic Forge in the sideboard. Here's the 4th place Jund deck, so we won't look at the second one in the top 8, but the big story with Jund is Wrenn and 6, which we'll look at in just a second. That has really pushed the deck. And that's why you're seeing less people playing the Rock and just going with Jund, because that card is just so good. Other than that, though, you kind of know the drill. 4 Liliana of the Veil, 2 Dark Confidant. I will say Bob is getting pushed out of the deck a little bit with some of the new cards coming in. This version runs 2, but that can vary a little bit. 4 Tarmogoyf, 4 Bloodbraid Elf, 3 Scavenging Ooze. Let's go ahead and take a look at the cards from Modern Horizons that are here. Wrenn and 6, like I mentioned, Seasoned Pyromancer and Nurturing Peatland. Sideboard has Plague Engineer and Collector Oof. Now, this deck wasn't doing it, but many Jund decks are running Cycle Lands. Of course, these were reprinted in Modern Horizons, making them modern legal. Barren Moor and Tranquil Thicket are the ones that you'll find many times in these decks. Weather the Storm is sometimes in the sideboard, too. 5th place was the Urzethopter Sword deck, and this is the 4-color variant, like I said, because it runs 2 Teferi Time Raveler. Sometimes you'll see like a Wear Tear in the sideboard as well. This particular copy of the deck isn't doing that. Other than that, though, this is mostly a Grixis deck, and this is basically a War of Invention deck, also running Thopter Foundry, sort of the meat combo. Let's go ahead and take a look, though, at the Modern Horizons cards here. Of course, there's a High Lord Artificer, Goblin Engineer, and Arkham's Astrolabe. In the sideboard of this one, Dead of Winter. Sometimes you'll find these cards in the main, though, too. Mystic Forge from Core Set 2020 and Prismatic Vista from Modern Horizons. And Weather the Storm every once in a while shows up in the sideboards, too. 7th place was Mono Red Phoenix. Now, it is a Phoenix, but Mono Red Phoenix this time around, which is a little more aggressive, as you can see here. You're going to have 4 Arclight Phoenix, 1 Bedlam Reveler, 4 Monastery Swiftspear, 4 Soulscar Mage, and then a lot of your cheap instants and sorceries, as you could imagine. This one also plays 1 main deck copy of Blood Moon. Let's go ahead and see what cards from Core Set 2020 or Modern Horizons made it in here. When it comes to the main deck, Lava Dart and Sunbaked Canyon. These are great for the aggressive decks, even if they're off color, just because if you get a little heavy on lands, you can turn the land in for card draw, hopefully hit some heat. Sideboard Shenanigans. Some decks are also running Fiery Islet, again, just for the card draw potential. And some decks are looking at Core Set 2020 to bring Leyline of Combustion into the sideboard. Alright, it's the deck of the weekend, it's Hogak. So this is what the deck list looks like. Not too different from the one with Bertram below. You're going to see a lot of the key cards here. Bloodghast, a creature that we'll talk about in just a moment, which is a pretty key one. For Gravecrawler as well here, for Vegevine, for Hogak Arisen Necropolis, again we'll see that in just a second too. For Faithless Looting, 2 Leyline of the Void right in the main deck here, they're not playing around. Now that's one of the things you got to watch out for. Some people are wondering if another card could get banned from this deck. If there's decks main decking Leyline of the Void because of this, that could lead to a banning. Even if the deck is put into check, if you have to put too much graveyard hate into all your builds, Wizards may take some action. So it's a little too early to get super concerned about it. We have to kind of see how the meta digests everything from the weekend, but that's something to think about. Okay, you're also going to notice there's no Altar of Dementia here. Now, some versions are running that, and we're going to look at that card in just a second, but this one wasn't. Okay, so here's your cards from Modern Horizons in the main. Carrion Feeder, that's the big card I was alluding to. This is a reprint, but of course became legal because it was in Modern Horizons. And there's Hogak Arisen Necropolis. Core Set 2020 gives us something for the sideboard with Rotting Regisaur, and you also get a copy of Shenanigans here from Modern Horizons. Now, some variations of the deck will run these cards from Modern Horizons. 2 of them were reprints, making them modern legal. Unearth and Altar of Dementia. We also get Nurturing Peatland here sometimes. Unearth sometimes is like a 1 of. Altar of Dementia sometimes like a 2 of, typically, when it does show up. Sideboard has some other options too. Plague Engineer and Force of Vigor also show up in some builds. Okay, let's go beyond the top 8 and look at some high-performing decks that could have made the top 8 if the player was able to do a little better in the draft rounds. Hogak Dredge is the first one. Now, this is Classic Dredge. 4 life from the loam here, one of the key differences from, say, the Hogak deck itself, but also you're going to see a lot of other familiar cards from that Classic Dredge build. 4 Creeping Chill, for example, 2 Narcomoeba, 4 Bloodghast, 4 Stinkweed Imp, the list goes on and on. However, this copy is running 3 Hogak Arisen Necropolis as well. Some will run like 1, but basically if you have Hogak in there now, they are referring to it as Hogak Dredge. Here's the cards from Modern Horizons. I already mentioned Hogak, of course, and Forgotten Cave is here too. Sideboard Shenanigans. Okay, here's Azorius Control. Also performed very well. Not too different, basically. A few cards from Modern Horizons here, but you're going to find 3 Jace the Mind Sculptor, 3 Narsep Harder of Vales, 2 Teferi Hero of Dominaria, 1 Teferi Time Raveler, 3 Snapcaster Mage. A lot of control going on here, of course. One of the cards from Modern Horizons, though, in the main is Force of Negation. In the sideboard, Winds of Abandon and another copy of Force of Negation. Some of the successful builds are also running Prismatic Vista in the main. Humans, another familiar deck that performed very well. 4 Ether Vial, 4 Mantis Rider, 3 Kitesail Freebooter, 4 Champion of the Parish. But Modern Horizons has helped this deck a little bit too. In the main here you find Ranger, Captain of Eos, and Silent Clearing. Out of the sideboard, Plague Engineer. Other decks do use Unsettled Mariner in the main, as well as Waterlogged Grove. And sometimes in the sideboard, you'll find Collector Roof. Iza Phoenix, the second most played deck of the weekend, and yeah, it can still perform very well. And you can see from this deck list, it's running 4 Thing in the Ice, 4 Arclight Phoenix. But there are some new cards as well for Modern Horizons here. You get Lava Dart, the reprint for Modern Horizons that became modern legal, Magmatic Sinkhole, Aria of Flame, and Fiery Islet. Out of the sideboard, Seasoned Pyromancer and Force of Negation. Other sideboard options include some Shenanigans, and also sometimes you'll find the Magmatic Sinkhole in the sideboard too. On to the Star City Games Modern Open. Now, this is a pure Modern tournament. No draft in this one. Let's look at the top 8. Well, the result ended up being the same. First place, Mono Green Tron, which also came in 6th place. Second place, 3rd place, 5th place, 7th place, Hogak, wow. 4th place is at Phoenix, and 8th place was Grixis Urza. We've already looked at all these deck lists, so we're going to skip the top 8 and move on to a couple other decks that performed well. We have Counters Company. This came in 9th place. Another very strong build recently for Collected Company, for Court of Calling. A lot of creatures, as you can see here. What do we get from Modern Horizons? Giver of Ruins is here, Ranger Captain of Eos, and Carrion Feeder. Sideboard has Plague Engineer and Hex Drinker. 13th place, we got a Gruul Phoenix build. Now, these are very, very similar to Mono Red Phoenix, so I won't spend a ton of time on them. Just glance at the deck list and you'll see it immediately. But there is a reason to play some green. That reason is right here, Ren and 6. The other cards for Modern Horizons in the main here, Seasoned Pyromancer, Lava Dart, Fiery Islet, and Sunbaked Canyon. Sideboard had another copy of Seasoned Pyromancer. 17th place was another classic modern deck, Amulet Titan, still doing well. 4 Amulet of Vigor. This one has 2 Finale of Devastation in it. 1 copy of Walking Ballista, 2 Oracle of Maldaya. Pretty familiar list, right? One big card, though, coming in here for Modern Horizons in the main. That is this reprint here, Eladamri's Call, which became modern legal, of course, with Modern Horizons. The sideboard has more cards from Modern Horizons and one from Core Set 2020. Collector Oof is here. Flusterstorm was here. I don't see a lot of it in Modern, but this deck was running 2 copies in the sideboard. Remember, this was the buy box promo for Modern Horizons, making it Modern legal, although you won't find it in booster packs there. Force of Vigor is here as well, and Veil of Summer from Core Set 2020. On to the Star City Games Modern Classic. Now, this is a smaller tournament, but let's look at the top 8. 4-color Urza came in first place. Amulet Titan came in second place. Humans came in third. Don't worry, Mono Green Tron's still fine, came in fourth place. Jund came in fifth. Dredge came in 6th. Now, that's classic Dredge, but it was running 1 Hogak, so maybe you would call it Hogak Dredge. 7th place, Merfolk. 8th place, Gruul Phoenix. Okay, so we looked at 7 of these decks, but we have not looked at Merfolk. Let's check it out. Here it is in 7th place, the Merfolk deck. I always like to see these do well. 4 Ether Vial, 4 Benthic Biomancer, 4 Lord of Atlantis, that's classic. 4 Master of the Pearl Trident. You get a couple Echoing Truths in here, 4 Spreading Seas. Let's see what's in the main for Modern Horizons. Force of Negation, Fiery Islet, Waterlogged Grove, and there's no cards in the sideboard from either Core Set 2020 or Modern Horizons. Another deck I wanted to look at was the 10th place Azorius Spirits deck, another tribal deck here for Ether Vial yet again, but this time you have your spirits to contend with. Selfless Spirit, 4 copies of that, 4 Spell Queller, 4 Supreme Phantom, of course, 4 Rattle Chains, but also we do have some cards from Core Set 2020 and Modern Horizons. The first one from Core Set 2020, Spectral Sailor. Great inclusion here. It's a spirit. Very powerful 1-drop. From Modern Horizons, you get Unsettled Mariner, Force of Negation, and Waterlogged Grove. No cards from either of these sets in the sideboard here. Alright, with that being said, that is the roundup from the weekend. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And also, what decks are you playing if you're a Modern or Standard player? I'd love to hear that. Until next time, though, hey, thanks for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and have a great day. Hey, thanks for watching. This video is made possible through the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Check out the description below for links to our Patreon page as well as our Amazon affiliate store, where a small percentage of all sales will also help support the channel. Finally, if you haven't had a chance yet to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the new videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a great day.